Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is Alex. I'm part of the committee of the March of the Living Australia, and it's my great pleasure to welcome everyone, and particularly to this event with Brett Kaye, who most of you know, but I'll introduce him in a minute. I want to start off by saying that acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. I'm in Melbourne, so I'm acknowledging the lands of the Bunurong people, of the Kulin Nation, and I want to acknowledge the elders of lands on wherever we meet, whether it's in Australia or elsewhere. I know we certainly have some people from outside of Melbourne, and Brett, of course, is joining us from abroad. So he may know who the original inhabitants are there, but that's part of what we're talking about. So we'll get to that in a minute. But firstly, this is part of what are the pillars of the March of the Living. It's not just a trip abroad. It's also partly to educate people more about the Holocaust, about Israel, about the contemporary Jewish world. And that's exactly what we're doing tonight. As I said, many of you know Brett Kaye. He's currently in Tallinn, Estonia. So he'll tell you why he's there. But in very briefly, Brett combines his love of Jewish education, social justice, music, and travel in all the work that he does. And that's he'll tell you about that shortly. He's had leadership positions in Jewish schools across Melbourne and Sydney. He's a Chazzan at St Kilda Shul, and he's also, which is what brings him to where he is now, the national director of the Joint Australia, which has been around for 108 years. For those who don't know, I'm sure Brett will explain who they are and what they do. It now gives me great pleasure to hand over to Brett in Tallinn, Estonia, and he'll tell you what he's doing there and why he's there. So over to you, Brett.
Thank you very much. All right, Alex, that was very lovely. Thank you for the introduction. It's so nice to be amongst friends. You know, I feel a bit strange because normally when I'm doing my Facebooks and my Zooms, I've got my keyboard in front of me and I'm doing my Shabbat Shalom. Hey, but that's not one of those today. We've sort of got a bit more of a serious feeling today. That being said, I was thinking about how to play this presentation today, and I've shied away from slides, I've shied away from PowerPoints, and I'm going to tell you why. Because actually being in the place itself, I think, is so incredible. And I'm at present in the Jewish Community Centre in Tallinn, Estonia. Now, Estonia is part of the Baltic region. It was devastated during the Shoah. But what I am going to finish my presentation on today is very much the idea of renewal. Because Tallinn is a thriving Jewish community. It's quite amazing. And with your permission and with my mobile phone, it's going to be a bit of a balagan, but I know that you guys don't mind. I'm actually going to take us on a very brief tour of the Jewish Community Centre because there's a whole lot of stuff that's happening here today. It's Sunday, it's before Pesach, and hopefully we'll be able to go and explore and have a bit of an adventure. But let's start off a little bit about why Alex asked me to speak today. So I'm wearing a couple of hats today. So the hat that I'm wearing on initially, because this is a joint presentation, my two hats, I'm a March of the Living alumni. I was lucky enough, together with, I see Shirley there, I see Vic out there in the audience, with some of the greats, with Sue Hampel and with Francis Prince and with Rabbi Ganendi, with Ralph Ganendi, to experience being an educator on two March of the Living trips. I know many have done many more, but for me that was wonderful, and it was to a large extent a springboard into the world of Shoah for me. I'd been teaching Shoah studies, Holocaust studies for many years, but really actually being in situ in Poland just gave me that added dimension to make it three-dimensional and just to have that really deep-seated understanding. And subsequently, I ventured to places like Lithuania, which is where my roots are. And I spent time in Lithuania and Latvia taking trips of my own, and began to understand a different dimension as well about where I come from. Because whilst Poland and Auschwitz is the story of the Jewish people, to a large extent, it wasn't my story because my family were not intimately connected, other than being part of Am Yisrael, the Jewish people. So it was important for me to go venture into Lithuania and to actually see the horrors that that presented, that Lithuania itself presented a very different dimension to the Holocaust, but very, very real nonetheless. I see in the audience there we've got the Quebecers, and Gid Quebecer is from Vilnius, same place where my grandparents were from, and you know, his family were very involved in that whole tragedy as well. So let me start like this. The Jewish people have lived in Estonia for a very long time, since the 14th century. So already in the 1300s, there were Jews in Estonia. But what was interesting about it was that it never formed a part of the Pale of Settlement that was set up by Catherine the Great, one of the great Tsarinas of Russia, hence great, not so great for the Jews though. And so they was not officially allowed to be here. But in 1865, the Jews of Estonia became ratified. They were allowed to be here. And in 1918, following the secession of World War I, they were given full rights. And the Jews were allowed to operate here like all citizens. They were given all the rights in the world. And it was the golden age, I'd say, of Estonian Jewry up until the 1930s, with the rise of anti-Semitism, the rise of Nazism, etc. And already then, the Jewish community began to be in peril. There was restrictions that were placed, and when the Soviets occupied the area, a lot of the Jews were kicked out. They were sent to Siberia, to Siberian prisoner of war camps. Many fled. About 3,000 Jews fled Estonia, and the remaining Jews that left behind, well, the situation for them was very similar to what happened throughout Eastern Europe at the time, particularly the Baltic regions as well, where the Einsatzgruppen, and I'm not quite sure, Alex, if you guys have been having seminars for the people that are heading on the march, if you've been, you know, understanding some of these terms that I'm talking about now, but the Einsatzgruppen were the mobile killing squads that basically followed the Nazis as they invaded a particular region. And what they did was, in a very systematic way, they would go into the forests, and they would literally murder communities one by one, men, women, children. And in that way, they sort of declared each of those cities Jew-free. Now, I'm going to take that term Jew-free, Judenfrei, and I'm actually going to put that in a historical context. Because on the 20th of January, 1942, you know, every single time I talk about this, I really get the cold shivers, because I remember being in Wannsee in Berlin for the first time with Sue Hampel, and it's set on the beautiful shores of the Wannsee, on a beautiful lake, in this beautiful mansion, and one walks into this mansion, this beautiful villa, and there on the wall are a whole lot of different artifacts. But really, friends, what this place was, it was the epicenter of the systematic planning of the destruction of the Jewish problem, in the words of the Nazis. So really what it was an understanding that there were Jewish people throughout Europe, and by the way, other places, and that the true solution to this Jewish problem is not going to be forced immigration, because nobody wanted us. We know at the Evian conference, the question was asked, and the beautiful Yiddish song, Wohin soll ich gehen, where will I go? Because we asked the world, where are we going to put the Jews? And everybody had different excuse. The Australian people said, well, we don't have a racial problem, a Jewish problem, nor do we want to import one. So, you know, everybody had their little excuse. So they realized very quickly, and by they, I'm talking about the Nazi regime, that the only real solution to getting rid of the Jewish people was going to be a final solution, was going to be to kill them. And it was at Wannsee on the 20th of January, 1942, that this proposition was put forward in a very systematic way. Numbers, documents, you know, as the Germans were wont to do. And it was established that these people were going to be killed. They were going to be sent to Poland. There were going to be special facilities that were going to be made up where the Jewish people were going to be killed. But the interesting part, where I say a relevance to Estonia, is that, and I'm going to actually take you outside in a little bit, where I'm going to show you the document, where it says, when it talks about Estonia, it says Judenfrei. That already by that stage, Estonia was the only country, district on that whole list that had the infamous honor of being Jew-free. Because by that stage, the Russians had sent a whole heap of them to Siberia. Many had fled into surrounding countries. What happened to them? Well, you know what? Surrounding countries didn't fare very well either. And then the remaining around about 1,000 were killed either by the Einsatzgruppen or were sent to camps and were murdered there. So that officially, by the stage of 1942, there were no Jews in Estonia, or at least there were no Jews that people knew about. There might well have been some in hiding as well. So it was more or less a typical story of the way that things worked in those days, but it highlights really the efficiency of the German machine, of the Nazi machine, of the way in which they operated. Now, following the war, 1945, some Jews did come back to Estonia, but throughout the communist years, there's very little activity that happened here, very little at all. So the old ways were forgotten to a large extent. And I was just talking to Ira Schlick, who, I'll tell you her story because I think it really typifies the sort of the modus operandus of the community. Ira Schlick, she's probably I'd say in her 30s, got a young family. She was actually born in Riga, but came to Tallinn as a very young girl. She was born in Shkent, maybe Tbilisi. I don't remember. She told me, but she went to Riga as a young girl. She went to the Chabad school there in Riga, and then she came to Tallinn, where she went. She joined the local Jewish community. She went to Savash Camp. So Savash Camp, I need to explain, is an initiative of the JDC, of the Joint, whereby together with the Ronald Lauder Foundation, Jewish kids from all Jewish teens, young people from all over Europe, Eastern Europe particularly, go to a little place just outside of Budapest, which is called Savash, and there a camp is run. And it's a camp that focuses on Jewish renewal. And people learn what it means to be Jewish, and they learn Jewish songs. It's kind of like a Ben Akiva Habonim camp where kids from all over Eastern Europe come, they meet each other, and they become the leaders of the community. She then became a madricha. She then went to study, and now she is the head of the Jewish Community Center in Tallinn. So it's that natural progression that we see, which is, I think, so very exciting. But I digress. We go back to the communist era where there was very little that was happening in Estonia from a Jewish point of view. There was stuff that was happening clandestinely, as there was throughout the Soviet world. But it was really after perestroika that the resurgence and the renewal and the reinvigoration of Jewish life in Estonia began. And I can tell you, just having spent, I've been here once before, but just having spent the morning here at this community center, it's 3,000, the community here is 3,000 strong. They've got a Chabad shul, of course. They've got the chief rabbi, whose name is, I've just made a few notes because, you know, my mind is, after 3 hours of sleep, Chief Rabbi Shmuel Kot is his name. And then a friend of David's, a friend of Alex's, whose name is Rabbi David Basok, has been here for 3 years. And him and his family are like the shlichim. He's a rabbi too, and a general educator. They've got a Jewish school now that starts from Kilda and goes up to 3rd grade. And it's one of the best schools actually in the city. And it has become a thriving Jewish community, which is really exciting to see. So post-war, various theologians posed or posited different responses. We call it theodicy, trying to rationalize the existence of a omnipotent, benevolent God in the face of human suffering. In other words, how can I believe in God when such terrible things happen? And I think it's a question that has really grappled the book of Job. You know, we see it, a classic paradigm of theodicy there. Job, who's a pious man, is afflicted with all these horrible things. Everything bad that can possibly happen to a human being happens to Job. And he cries out to God and he says, well, God, how am I supposed to believe in you if these are all the horrible things that happen? And the Shoah was an epoch event, an epoch-making event that really shook the foundations of humanity's belief in a supreme being, I think, to its very core. And those people with faith were having to grapple with these questions, and it makes perfect sense. Because, you know, humanity really, I mean, the understanding of God, in a sense, helps us to anchor ourselves to earth, but also to have this connection with heaven. But we rely on good things happening to us as well. You know, it's about God helping us. You know, yesterday when I was flying here late last night after Shabbat, there was a storm landing in Tallinn. And what is my first thing? It's like, we become very religious under, a tragedy. It's like, oh God, please, no, I get very, grabbed onto the poor lady next to me. She nearly had a heart attack herself because she was sleeping. But the things that we do become quite, and when these terrible things happen, it shakes our core. Comes along a theologian by the name of Emil Fackenheim that some of you might well have heard of. I was fortunate enough to hear him speak at Hebrew University when I was studying there for my master's, and he was one of the lecturers. Very dry man. He used to read his notes, but what he had to say was really, really profound. And I think one of the most, probably famous of his writings, he talks about that at Auschwitz, he says, and Auschwitz, we're talking about the Holocaust. That's his way of describing the Holocaust. God revealed himself to humanity in a way that has not been seen, says Emil Fackenheim, since Revelation at Sinai. And he says that at Auschwitz, God revealed his 614th commandment. So we have the 613 canonized in the Torah. And of course, that's immutable, can't be touched. But says Fackenheim that the Holocaust was such an important and critical moment in the history of the Jewish people that at that stage, there was an extra mitzvah or commandment that was released. And that mitzvah was, do not grant Hitler a posthumous victory. In other words, one of the responsibilities that we have is to invest in Jewish renewal, not to give up God, not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, but rather to maintain our faith and to maintain our tradition and to maintain our ritual, even if we don't necessarily believe, because not doing so would be giving Hitler that final victory, right? Hitler built or had plans to build this amazing museum of the Jewish people that was going to showcase this race of humanity that existed but doesn't exist anymore. And here we are, we're not a museum, we're a thriving, living, breathing, exciting group of people with varying opinions. And I think that when I come to a place like this, and I think this is a stream of consciousness. When I arrived here today and I came to the Jewish the center, I didn't quite know what to expect. And when I walked in and I saw the people coming to collect their matzah and wine for Pesach, and I saw the kids making their Haggadot and listening to stories, upstairs the elderly doing Israeli dancing, the amazing community space, the museum, people in and out, people, tourists coming to listen and to visit. And I thought to myself, you know what? I don't think there could be any more of an example of what Fackenheim was talking about in his post-Shoah theology, not to give Hitler posthumous victory. What was his goal? Well, to a large extent, he achieved it. This place was Jew-free. There were no Jews. And yet here I am in a community that is vital, that is exciting, that is growing, that is burgeoning, that is young. And that in itself, I think, is the greatest success and the greatest victory that we have as Jewish people. So, friends, I'm very excited, by the way, so Alex introduced me as the National Director of the Joint Australia. So the Joint, a bit of history. The Joint has been around for 108 years. It was established when a cablegram was sent out from Ottoman Palestine, basically to a bunch of philanthropists, wealthy people in the States saying, guys, well, this is terrible, disease is rife, we don't have food, we need some help. And a group of wealthy American Jews got together, they pooled their resources and they sent across some money and they basically helped them. And from that moment onwards, the Joint, it's been collectively known as the Joint, the American Joint Distribution Committee, has become the Jewish 911, the Jewish 000 of the Jewish world. And today it operates in Israel. It's Israel's largest partner in philanthropy. In fact, a lot of Israeli social welfare programs across the board, Jews, Arabs, Bedouins, are matched dollar for dollar. The Joint, the Israeli government, the Joint seeds the programs, develops them, and then hands them over. And in 70 countries around the world. That's how I got to know Joint and to love it, because when I used to take tours to India, to Morocco, Lithuania, when I came to Tallinn, Cuba, and Argentina, and places around the world that we don't necessarily think about their Jewish communities. Well, the Joint looks after those communities. And what does that mean? Well, in Australia, we have Jewish welfare, which incidentally, once upon a time was Joint. About 30,000 Jews were brought across from post-war Europe to Australia, paid for by the Joint. A bunch of philanthropists that lived somewhere else decided, just like we're doing today for the Ukraine, and I'll talk more about that in a second, because I know that Alex wants me to talk about where I was last year this time. A bunch of philanthropists, just like you guys, were sitting in their homes, and there was a call. Probably some annoying person picked up the phone, but maybe not so much picked up the phone. They might have written them a letter or knocked on their door, just like you guys get from the charity campaigns, beep, 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 beep every second. And that's what would have happened. And they said, there are a bunch of people that want to go live in Australia. Where are you, crazy? Australia? They're Jews in Australia? Well, we want to get them there. Can you help us? Well, what do you need? We need a couple of dollars. Okay, here we go again. Another person knocking on the door. Wrote out a check, gave them the money. And then it was that money that was then used to bring your grandparents and your parents and all the rest of it that came from Europe, for those people whose family came from Europe, and schlepped across the waters and landed up in Australia. The ship, like the Exodus, for example, it was a Joint ship. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was paid for by the Joint. So it's really been there across the last 180 years, and it has been a steadfast constant across the generations. It's totally apolitical. It doesn't take sides. But currently, and Alex, I'm going to talk to your point right now to make you happy. Give me a smile, Alex. Thank you. Okay, amazing. So a year ago this time, I was on the border of Ukraine. The war had just broken out. And at that stage, the world actually cared, because when we opened up the papers, we could see stuff about the Ukrainian conflict. Yeah. So all of a sudden, the world was focused on this conflict that was happening in Ukraine. And JDC had close to 7,000 full-time employees that were, that were already in situ prior to the conflict erupting. So it's their Jewish welfare. There are about 200,000 Jews in Ukraine at the time. And I'm not going to go into what does a Jew mean, because I always get asked that question, and I really prefer not to focus on that, because we're talking about a humanitarian conflict at the moment. Grandparents Jewish, parents Jewish, all the time we focus on these things, but for the sake of, of being a good citizen of the world, we're not going to focus on that. We're going to talk about the Jewish community, the way that it's defined, and by the law of return. And a lot of these people found themselves in absolute strife, as you can imagine, because their homes were being bombed. They never had places to go. They never had food to eat. They never had their medication. Those people who were on dialysis weren't able to do so. We don't think about things like this. Their pets, those people who required thyroxine for their thyroid, they never had access to these things. And all of a sudden, it was a human catastrophe that was actually unrivaled, unparalleled for many, many, many years, for decades. And we were so lucky that the Joint were in situ, that they were already there, because it was very difficult to get people in. And most of the people who worked for us remained, which was quite an amazing thing. And when the subways were bombed, people couldn't travel anymore. There were no cars on the road because it was too dangerous. A lot of the caseworkers actually moved in with their clients and spent their time with their clients. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to get to them, and their clients would have died. We're not talking about going to give people manicures and pedicures and to trim their nails every so often. We're talking about people that, if not for the care that was provided to them, they would have died. It would have been as simple as that, yeah? So I had a conference in Israel just before Pesach, and what I decided to do was to hop across to the borders of Ukraine and to spend some time during Pesach and to sing and to do my thing. I had people that translated for me, and it was quite amazing. It was probably one of the most amazing things that I've done, being so involved in an operation whereby Jewish community came together in the most powerful and profound way. It was humbling, to say the least, the way in which different organizations work together in harmony, the way that they don't necessarily always do in places around the world, where people came together. There wasn't a competition for the buck. It wasn't organizations saying, well, no, I do this. No, actually, you do that. No, I do that. I'm the best for Ukraine. No, you're the best for you. none of that sort of stuff was important. All that was important was the joint would go into a community clandestinely. They would pack a bus full of people. They would take them out as best as possible, whatever that involves, going through border checkpoints and all the rest of it. And there we stood at the border, greeting people as they came, with hot food, with a smile, with counselors, with people to look after the kids. And remember, we're talking about mainly women and children here, because the men weren't allowed to leave. And I want to tell you something really that struck me as very, very profound at the time. My idea of what a refugee looks like really was turned onto its head. Because when you guys think of a refugee, I don't know what you think of, but I sort of have this vision of a refugee as somebody with tattered clothes, like with their sack on their back and all that. Here were young, vibrant people coming with Mac computers that were really, with their kids, and they looked like people like me and you. And what happened? They came, they got their food, and then they would be stuck in a hall, and they would sleep with sleeping bags. They were given warm clothes, etc. And that's what happened to these people until they were able to be resettled. And the JDC would settle them into some communities around Europe as well. Most people, then we worked with the Jewish Agency, obviously, who wanted to take the Jews, obviously, to Israel. Most of the people don't want to go, because what do they want to do? They want to go back home after the war, because that's where their men are, their husbands, their sons, their fathers. So they don't want to go too far, and they don't know how long the conflict is going to last. But most of the people decide to stay. So what we're doing at the moment, a year later, the conflict is as terrible as it was. It's wintertime. The mental health has really plummeted of the population, as one can understand, because a year of conflict really does play havoc. So there's special mental health centers that have been drawn up. The cheseds, people go in, get warm food, warm houses, medication is provided. I've got a statistic here, actually, that 13,000 Jews were evacuated by joint from the Ukraine, and they have purchased and distributed, this figure is astounding, I think, 800 tons of humanitarian aid. That's a staggering amount. It's a staggering amount of food and medication and clothing that has been given out to the population. So the work is continuing. The work is important. It's critical. It's vital. I think Sarita, if you want to know more about what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, Sarita Gold, who helps us with the marketing from admin, she has put a link there. You're welcome to go in and to see the work that's happening there if you want to learn a little bit more about what is happening in Ukraine now. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to just stop now and take, let's say, 5 minutes of questions about stuff that I've spoken about. And then there's some kitties waving at me outside. I'm going to take you guys on a little tour around. So any questions, please? Alex, I'm going to let you, if you can just take care of this for me.
Yes, there's no questions in the chat yet, and anyone who's interested, please do so. But maybe tell us a little why, I think one of the questions often when people speak about the joint is why it keeps such a low profile. I'm sure some of the things you've said, some people wouldn't know that it's, Israel's largest partner, and that it does so many things, as you said, in a clandestine way, obviously with the war that's necessary, but in other ways, and has done for many years. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's part of a specific strategy.
Sure. Okay. Well, is it a strategy? I'd say no. But the way that it works is like this. The joint's biggest success is when it's no longer needed, when it becomes irrelevant, just like what happened in Australia. The joint was very important because without it, the community wouldn't have, I suppose, there was an existing Anglo-German community that existed from the 1800s. But as for the post-war Jews, they wouldn't have arrived in Australia if not for the joint, because how would they wouldn't have got the visa, they wouldn't have got the transport, etc. But what the joint does is, once it's working with a particular group of people, it works until it's able to then hand that over, whether it's the Israeli government, they'll seed a project, but never more than 3 or 4 years. They'll seed the project and then they will hand it over. Once it's handed over, they take themselves away. And therefore, it's no longer part of the joint. So in Australian history, who knows about the joint? Just people who at the time were affected by the work that the joint did. Today, do people not more? It's because what I'm doing and spreading the word. And last year, we sent an amazing amount of money to Ukraine. We kick way above our weight, punch way above, and I'm so proud of our community. We sent millions of dollars of aid to Ukraine because of you guys, and that's the work that the joint did. But the way that joint operates is very much behind the scenes. Also because it needs to be apolitical. It cannot operate in countries if we're out there going, look at the work, because look, we work in Ukraine, but then we know that other people will be, well, you're working in Ukraine, but then which side of the conflict are you on? Yeah, we are not in any, officially, we are Switzerland. We are neutral. We have to be in order to operate in these countries, and countries that I can't even tell you that we operate in because I'm not at liberty to do so. Yep. But there are very many countries around the world that you would not think of. And by the way, we don't only do Jewish work. Yeah, we do a lot of non-sectarian work as well. We work in Africa with women in peril, helping them with their agriculture, with their irrigation, on selling technology, breaking out of the circle of poverty. We're now in Cape Town, for example, in the townships. I had the most incredible Alex that you met, man, Rick Hodes, doctor, the only spinal doctor in the whole of Ethiopia that has saved thousands of children's lives. That is all paid for and sponsored by the joint. That's part of our Tikkun Olam program, the Good program, giving back to the world. Jewish people being a light unto the nations, sharing what we have with the rest of the world. So I don't know, to some extent, Alex, if that answers your question.
Yes, well, it very much does. And continuing on from that, what are you doing in Tallinn now? Is there a particular project that you're working on, or what brings you there at the moment?
Okay, so the answer to that is probably less romantic. Once a year, the people who do the work that I do from around the world gather somewhere. Yeah, so last year in Israel where it was nice and warm, this year in Tallinn where it's nice and freezing. That being said, really special at the same time. And we get together and we share our successes and our failures and our lessons. And we hear from amazingly inspirational people. We meet members of the community, and then we do what JDC does. What does the joint do? It takes food, it drives for an hour and a half into a little village somewhere where there's an old lady who doesn't have somebody to help her, gives them food, gives them clothing, and we go on field visits. So we go and spend a lot of time actually seeing the work that the joint does. Yeah, so it gives us inspiration to be able to go back to our home countries and to say, you know what, I'm asking you for stuff because at the end of the day, that's what I do. When people see me, sometimes they cross the road unless I say that I'm going to sing them a song, but it doesn't matter. I'm happy with that. But I can go with my hand on my heart and say, you know what, I'm asking you for help, but I could not be asking you for a better cause, because really at the end of the day, this is about saving lives. This is about Jewish peoplehood and Am Yisrael at its best. It is absolute holy work. So I suppose what it does is it just invigorates, and already now, and I haven't even started, and I'm feeling really invigorated and excited and ready to go and, rah, and bring it on. So that's what we're doing. The next 3 or 4 days, I'll be home Friday morning, ready for Shabbat, and this year's Seder in Australia, please God.
There's a question about Estonian Jewry. You did touch on that, but maybe if you go for a walk now in the center, you can tell us a little more about Estonian Jewry and how their situation is set up there.
Okay, so before I even go for the walk, I'll just give you a very quick synopsis. About 3,000 Jews in Estonia. I think the most exciting thing about it all is that a lot of the community leaders are actually homegrown, which is wonderful. A lot of people that have been through the JDC system, that have been through the Ronald Lauder system, the education systems, they've been to Israel, they've been on these camps that I was telling about earlier on, the Savash camp. There's another camp that I wrote down. What is it called here? I don't remember. I wrote it somewhere, but it's just a name. I mean, it's not really that important, but it's a camp for the Baltic people, in particular, Baltic kids. Then they become madrichim, then they become leaders, and then they become the heads of the community, and that's very exciting in itself. I told you that there's a Jewish school that's very successful, and every single year it grows a year level. So I think it's 3 years old. It started off in the first grade, then it went to the second grade, then it went to the third grade. Next year they're planning the fourth grade, fifth grade, and hopefully that's going to continue to grow and to burgeon, to swell. They've got great facilities for the elderly, to look after them, amazing facilities for young people. And as Ira told me earlier on, her kids go from camp to camp to camp to camp, from one Jewish camp to another summer camp to another winter camp to another. And she says that the community is governed by the rhythm of the Chagim. So I grew up in a relatively small city in South Africa called Durban. It's not tiny by any means, but it was one of the smaller communities. I can tell you that one's Judaism becomes very important because there are not that many Jews, so therefore the Jews that are there, so we really came together as a community. The youth movements were strong, and when we went to camp, it was incredible. And I get that feeling over here. I think that's one of the reasons that I feel such a kindred spirit with where I am at the moment, because it's a smaller community, but it's passionate. You can feel it from the members. The other thing that I think was really cool was when I looked through the community diary, and you guys can have a look at the website if anybody's interested. You can put it up on the chat. It is, I wrote it down, but while I'm looking at yes, that's eje.ee, eje.ee, and it actually lists on what's happening today, the members of the community, because it's small, it lists whose birthday is every single day. Today's birthday is Chaim Shmerel, Lucy David, whatever it happens to be, and it gives their name, which I think is really, really neat. I think it's cool, that it brings that intimacy of a small community, brings them home. All right, are you ready to take a bit of a walk?
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I'm currently in the library. So, I mean, you can just see it looks like there's the view outside. You can see it's a bit grey. But this is all the Jewish Community Center. All of that over there in the yellow, that's all part of the center as well. And so we'll go for a walk around. This is the library, as I said. And it's on 4 floors, the center. And this over here is the corridor that leads to the museum. You can hear you guys, can you hear me fine?
Yes,
amazing.
yes.
Great. So this is it's a hall that has over here a name wall of all the Jews who were murdered during the Shoah. There's this page over here. You can see at the top the word Juden frei, Jew free. And there's another one over here. So these were all the Jews who were murdered during the Shoah. It's a lovely space, actually. And it leads to, I'm not sure, oh, here we go, to the Jewish Museum. I'm not going to talk in here, but I'll just show you very quickly. Oh, there's no one in here. So I can talk. I love this over here. Look over here. This is Maccabea. They've got a strong Maccabi team that represents Estonia. So this is all part of the Jewish renewal.
Is it in English?
It's in what's it called? Estonian and in Russian. It's not in English, no. So that's a neat little setup. Here's some artifacts that were rescued. Now that I'm assuming is not for Brit Milah. I'm assuming that's for Shechita, etc. Okay. So then I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you. Are you guys happy to walk with me?
Yeah, this is great.
Excellent. I'm happy. Good. Let's see if there's anything happening upstairs. This is where they were doing some Israeli dancing earlier on. Let's see. Sure. Maybe.
Oh. I think we lost you.
I am, and so are the people watching. We're just doing a little bit of a presentation. Here you go. What's your name?
Marina. It's a dancing Israeli council group.
Israeli dancing group.
Yeah.
You're dancing. Amazing. Lovely to meet you. Guys, well, there you go. Some Israeli down there. And now, let's go see if we can find oh, actually, I'll take you to the offices, which look remarkably like in Melbourne. We've got Beth Weitzman. I forgot what the offices are called in Sydney, the community buildings. Sorry. Okay, well, I'm going to end soon, but I thought I'd just show you. These are some of the kiddies. Hello. There we go. Say hello. Hello. These are some of the kiddies. And what are they doing today?
They are doing a frame from the book. It's a story about Moses who passed through the sea.
Are they doing the story of Moshe? Okay, of Moses. Okay. Chag Sameach, everybody. Let's see what you've got there. See you soon. Bye then. Okay, well, there you go. So I think what this shows really is we've seen some of the elderly, we've seen the mechanism of the running, and we've seen the future. And this is just a few. There were probably about 3 times that amount when I came earlier on. I think which really bodes well for the future. So when we support, really at the end of the day, I think we don't quite always think about, well, what does that mean? All right. And what I love about this is I don't think there's a better example of what Jewish renewal and Jewish continuity and working and striving to maintain that actually means when we come to a place like this. Oh, I'm coming somewhere. Let's see. The lady's taking me somewhere. What we're going to see. Let me just see if the internet works. Here's a Hebrew class. Can you still hear me, Alex?
Yes. So far, so good.
Shalom. מה שלומכם? בסדר. So here they're having Hebrew class today. דובי. וגם דובי. Very nice. That's amazing. Thank you. תודה רבה. שלום להתראות. Bye. Shalom. There we go. So I don't think there's a better way that I could end than with that. Any questions, please feel free. Anything at all.
Everyone seems to be answering you in English. Do they all understand? Or do you have...
the adults, yes. And they learn English at school. Interestingly enough, in the Baltics, people are very divided by their language. So you have Estonians who speak Russian, you have Estonians who speak Estonian, but everybody learns English. It's good question. So Debbie has asked the question, anti-Semitism in Tallinn in Estonia. They actually said that this year they're celebrating 35 years of the renewal of the Jewish Center. And it's the first time that they're actually going to be doing it in public. They're doing it in public, outside, because they feel very confident that the community will embrace it. So I think that, whilst anti-Semitism does exist, I think that the sentiment that I've heard from the community is that there is a feeling of tolerance. When my taxi driver brought me this morning, he goes, I gave him the address. He says, "Oh, you're going to the synagogue?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Has somebody died? Do you need to say the special prayer?" So he knew he knew all about it, and he was lovely, and they feel very comfortable to express their Judaism as much as it's sort of psychologically understanding that they're coming out of communism, they're coming out of a tragedy that predated the communism, and they're in renewal. And I think that in general, people feel very confident and comfortable with being Jewish in public. So there is anti-Semitism, but it's not something that they're grappling with daily necessarily. Anything else?
Any other questions? Any other comments?
Estonian collaborators. Well, you know what? The truth is that collaboration happened in every European country. Obviously, I know that there's a notorious story in Melbourne about they speak about the kapos. There was an article that was published in the Jewish News at one stage, I was told, where it literally named a whole lot of kapos, those people, the Jews who assisted, and no judgment, in the camp in order to save their lives.
Yep.
And there are that exist in the community, although less and less so, as there are survivors, less and less so. But I don't know how they confront that. I haven't asked that question. It's a good question. I'll see if I can find out there. We can have a chat, and I can let you know.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like a very Zionist community. Do they travel?
Yeah, absolutely. Everywhere I go, I see. We stand with Israel. There are Israeli flags. There's the Magen David in somebody's office, and the menorah, etc. Very Zionist. And for them, what is success? Well, success is actually when the kids finish school, they actually send them to Israel, and they go spend some time there, and they get that chizuk that they need, hopefully to come back and be leaders in the community here too. I love the Eitz Chaim. I think, the idea of growth, rebirth as the symbol of the community, I think, of the center, I think is wonderful. Is very, very cool.
Phil has a question, if you see that. Oh no, that's just Yeah,
That's just to thank you.
Yeah, it's true, but it is true though that we very rarely hear about the Jews or in places like Estonia. So thank you everyone for joining us. I think, as Phil said at the end, I think we're a very interesting presentation from a community we don't hear of very much. As Brett said, he's only there for a short time. He'll be back for Pesach. So anyone in Melbourne, if you see him around, you can ask him some more questions. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining us. As you know, we have a group going to On March of Living this year. And as Brett said, he started a lot of what he does now because of the inspiration he got from March of Living. So hopefully the rest of us will have that as well. In the meantime, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you to Brett, if he can still hear us. And we wish you all a happy Pesach. And our next events will be in May after Pesach and after the group returns from March of Living. So have a good evening and thank you again. Good night.